is a request by council members Jerry Kern and Jack Feller to present the findings from the Oceanside Chamber of Commerce Independent Economic Impact Study on the SOAR conducted by Lynn Reaser Ph.D. of Point Loma Nazarene University.
Okay, I'll open. I'll let Jack close, but Dr. Reaser, please come up and talk about this. You know, this is a very important issue coming before us in Oceanside, and I think the public should be informed about exactly what this consequences of this, you know, I think a very flawed and terrible initiative, but I will let Dr. Reaser proceed. So go ahead, Dr. Reaser, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Honorable members of the council, staff, and the public, we were delighted to be able to look at this study and try to secure as many of the conclusions in an objective manner as possible. Let me, this evening, focus on 5 key topics. First of all, some of the lessons from other cities that have implemented SOAR or SOAR-like initiatives, the impact on the city's housing goals, the effects on agriculture and agritourism, the implications for jobs in the economy, and finally, the impact on the city's budget. First of all, I think it's important to be clear what the underlying issue is. We've heard quite a bit of discussion about, and rightly so, concerns for preservation of parks, open space, but virtually all of the open space now used for parks, or potentially could be used for parks, as you know, is publicly owned, already would require a vote by the people for any change of use, and therefore would not be affected by this initiative. We are therefore really talking about the disposition of the 3,340 acres of land that are agriculturally zoned. You can see here mapped in the northeast part of the city, and in particular, the 2,250 acres of farmland that is now actively grown in various crops. In terms of the experience of other cities that have implemented SOAR type measures, generally the effects are slower economic growth, higher home prices, and reduced housing affordability. Here you can see the experience of Ventura County. In the 20 years prior to SOAR, the county outperformed the state in terms of job growth by 50%. In the last 5 years, the area has underperformed the state by 50%. Jobs are linked to housing. To the extent that houses are not available, there will not be the workers, and as a result, the jobs will not be able to be filled. We've seen record numbers of companies leaving Ventura County during recent years. Oceanside has a housing crisis, as do most cities in the coastal strip in California. In the last 5 years, as you can see here, wages have increased at an average annual pace of less than 2.5%, while home prices have escalated at an average of 10% per year. Housing affordability has therefore continued to worsen. The state, as you know, has set a housing goal for the city of Oceanside to create over 5,000 housing units by the year 2021. At this point, we should be about 55% on our way of achieving that goal. We are only at 14% of that target. In the last 5 years, we have added only about 155 housing units per year. To catch up, we would now have to create more than 1,100 housing units per year. That is clearly not going to happen unless we address some other housing options. Not only do we have a crisis in housing, but agriculture here in Oceanside is being seriously challenged. On the one side, farmers are being squeezed by rising prices of labor and water, and the other side by climbing imports. And there are really three primary channels that farmers have that they could become sustainable and viable. Unfortunately, SOAR would appear to block each of those channels or paths to survival. First, farmers could invest in major upgrades, but SOAR would appear to prevent that kinds of massive infrastructure by saying that basically you would have to preserve the character of the current situation. Second, farmers could become engaged in developing a major profitable agritourism business, but that would involve significant investment in infrastructure to support lodging, retailing, and other parts of a truly viable agritourism cluster. And third, farmers could redeploy some parts of their land to other uses, commercial or residential. But again, that would be prevented from the SOAR initiative. So ironically, although SOAR intends to preserve farming, it actually prevents farmers from pursuing a path to make farming sustainable in the city. We looked at three possible alternatives to developing the 2,250 acres of land that is now currently being farmed. Option one would be what we call restricted use, which is apparently what the SOAR initiative would intend, and that would be the status quo would continue. That area would continue to be farmed as it is today in various crops. Second, we looked at a plan of limited development, where you still would have about 1,700 acres farmed in various crops, but the rest in some agritourism businesses, as well as about 1,000 housing units. And a third, what we call moderate development, which would involve about 1/3 of the total land that is today agriculturally zoned, that would still have over 1,100 acres grown in various crops, but also have a more robust agritourism business and about 2,000 additional housing units. The differences in economic results are really quite striking. Under the current usage, what we call restricted use, you would have about, after 50 years after development started in 2034, some 2,000 jobs, whereas you'd have more than 4,000 jobs under the moderate development case. Under the restricted use case, you'd have about $150 million in terms of gross regional product, whereas that number would be about $400 million under the moderate development case. Those are the opportunity costs that SOAR would bring to this overall area. Also, it's important to look at the overall impact on the city's budget. Again, by 2034, if you look at just the contribution of this agricultural area, you would be seeing a contribution, if the city were be running a deficit, of another nearly $500 million to a deficit. Whereas a moderate development case, this area would be generating a surplus that would annually run about $2.5 million. There also would be a significant contribution to infrastructure badly needed in the city from allowing at least a moderate development. If you consider that each housing unit would bring another $100,000 in infrastructure spending, plus another $52,000 per unit in terms of impact fees, which includes affordable housing. So in conclusion, although the intent of SOAR is certainly very laudable, and I think anyone would applaud it, and I certainly would, But unfortunately, some policies, some have unintended consequences. And I'm afraid that this, in the case of SOAR, would be true. In particular, the outcome is likely to be very different from that envisioned by the SOAR initiative backers. Instead of a picture of flower fields, strawberry fields, and a vibrant agritourism sector, the ultimate outcome would probably more likely be an area of a lot of land let to go fallow, or land subdivided into large landed estates sold to wealthy owners. And in summary, SOAR would block a path to sustain agriculture and develop a truly vibrant agritourism business that you've all talked about, to meeting the city's critical housing needs, to generate new jobs and more economic growth, to invest in critical infrastructure, and to fund various community priorities, ranging from more police and fire protection to various community activities, such as 2 weeks ago we heard from many of our citizens for the need for a community pool, to helping to address the city's long-term pension obligations. Thank you very much.
We have 5 speakers on this item. I'll call you forward as Scott Ashton, followed by Christopher Rodriguez, Neil Nagata, Michelle Keeler, and Dennis Martinick.
If you called your name, please come down and line up behind the podiums.
Honorable Mayor, council members, my name is Scott Ashton, CEO of the Oceanside Chamber of Commerce. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I think what stands out to me the most about the SOAR initiative is the lost opportunities that it creates. Opportunities to do something creative and really special in terms of agritourism for our community, and also opportunities to be innovative in the way we address our workforce housing needs. As you saw, the Point Loma Economic Impact Study does not mince words. SOAR will hurt farmers and stop meaningful economic activity and new jobs for Oceanside. To keep our city from becoming a bedroom community for the wealthy, we need to keep investing in business growth, we need to keep adding jobs, and create places where local workers can afford to live. The study shows that the vote on this measure will have real material consequences for our community. We're talking about forfeiting serious economic opportunities and advancements if the measure passes. 1,800 potential jobs and more than $150 million in wages and income could be lost if SOAR becomes law. There's a huge opportunity cost if we allow ourselves to be fooled by the feel-good nature, by the feel-good title of this initiative. My guess is that no one loves Oceanside's farmland more than its farmers, and we need to respect the voices of those families who have farmed here for generations and know what it takes to stay in business. If they're saying that this measure will make it next to impossible for them to keep their farms, and this study backs that up, we need to pay attention to them. A good place to start is by reading this study and the city's own study. I urge voters to take the time to understand what SOAR really means for Oceanside, and I'm confident that you will draw the conclusions that SOAR is not good for our community. For me, these studies and the facts that are present are all I need to decide, and I will be voting no on SOAR. Thank you.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, council members. My name is Christopher Rodriguez. I am a South Morrill Hills resident. I am also a farmer, a small business owner, and a veteran. I currently grow avocados, passion fruit, guava, and recently planted coffee. I'm also in the process of remodeling what I hope to open as a bed and breakfast in the area and a boutique event venue. And with the coffee, I would love to roast it. And so what I'm trying to express is, as farmers and speaking with farmers and meeting with farmers on a regular basis, we want opportunity. We want to be able to have the freedom to do business and to create money for our family. And the SOAR initiative states in its title saving Oceanside's agricultural and open space. There's not open space there in South Morrill Hills. That is commercial enterprises doing business, providing for their family. That's their private property. It's our private property. And the SOAR initiative is not going to save agriculture. It's going to put handcuffs on farmers, and it's going to limit their opportunity. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Michelle Keeler, one of the last commercial farmers out in South Morrill Hills. I want to thank you for setting aside time to discuss the findings of this SOAR Initiative Impact Report. In no mixed terms, it makes clear that the SOAR Initiative does endanger local farming, and it leads to the demise of an agricultural zone. That's not the Oceanside that I want to live in, nor does it preserve or honor agriculture and all that we and other farming families have created in South Morrill Hills over the last several decades. I sincerely hope that this doesn't take place. Unfortunately, skepticism and misunderstandings have brought us here, and that's why I'm glad that you're considering the findings of this study. We as local farmers do not oppose SOAR because we want to overly develop our land. We oppose SOAR because it's not only bad for current farming, but it does absolutely nothing to preserve agriculture in the future. We're actually focused on a vision plan that focuses on truly preserving agriculture and agritourism, where non-farmers can come out and experience agriculture in a way that helps our economy. It preserves ag land from being developed, and it keeps agriculture viable, as well as making South Morrill Hills a really great place to live. In one stroke, SOAR kills this vision. The kind of agritourism that is allowed under SOAR does nothing to preserve farming in South Morrill Hills. I urge you and every voter to look at the facts, to really consider this report that was presented, consider SOAR's consequences, and consider the alternatives. Once you do that, I think that you will join local farmers in realizing that SOAR is bad for agriculture. Thank you for your time and efforts on this, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Hello, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today. I am Neil Nagata, a third-generation farmer and third-generation Oceanside resident. At your last meeting, the city's results on the impact report on SOAR initiative were presented. The research made it very clear that what the measure will do is very different from what the backers say it will do. While SOAR is branded as a pro-farming movement, your report clearly showed that by restricting farmers' property rights, devaluating land, the measure will likely end the farming in Oceanside. It only secures large estate homes for the wealthy and not farmland. And today we're hearing about a separate independent economic study done by a respected economist from Point Loma University that came to the very same, if not even more alarming conclusion. Just one paragraph from the study will summarize my concerns for this measure. As a longtime farmer in this community, I quote, "While the intent of the SOAR initiative is to protect agriculture in the city of Oceanside, it actually is likely to lead to the demise. It will block 3 channels of the farmers that could otherwise pursue to keep their operations viable." And that was presented by Dr. As a farmer, I can attest to these legitimate worries. If we cannot make long-term infrastructure investments to support agriculture, such as a recycled water line, and I cannot secure ongoing financing because of property devaluation, and cannot innovate by using some of our property to create new economic opportunities, then tell me how to keep our farms alive here in Oceanside. Now that we have the facts about this measure and its disastrous consequences it will have for our community, it's time to state clearly and directly, not only vote on SOAR, the only vote on SOAR is no. On this paper up ahead is a quote out of CDFA information, and you can see by 2010 to 2015 we lost 4,200 farms in California, and farmers lost $9.7 billion. And so anybody that says that farmers aren't trying hard and working hard, we really are, but the economics are just very, very tough. Thank you.
My name is Dennis Martnick. I'm resident of Morrill Hills, also a farmer. I raise macadamia nuts, also citrus that I donate to food banks. The essence of economics is supposed to be common sense, and what you heard tonight is nonsense. The Reaser report makes conclusions based on assumptions that aren't stated. The assumptions that are stated are wrong, and it leads to conclusions that's completely not what SOAR is about. The reason we did SOAR to begin with is because we don't trust the City Council. We saw what you did with the Integral project. You encouraged them to move forward when it was very obvious. Your Planning Commission voted 6-0 against it. Your staff recommended against it. Your Chamber of Commerce recommended against it, and you decided to go ahead and encourage them to move forward. The reason you're finding agriculture demising in California is because of the kind of development that you're proposing here in Oceanside, high-density residential. The last report that you saw 2 weeks ago was reasonable in that at least it stated its assumptions, and it also made conclusions with hedges. Some of the hedges, for example, it is not possible to quantify the probability of land use changes under either SOAR or existing policy conditions. Another one, it should be further noted that TNDG, the studiers, has not evaluated the feasibility from a landowner or developer's perspective of residential and or industrial development in existing agricultural areas. The proposal last time showed that SOAR would have very minimal impact, and that was not including consideration of the positive fiscal impact it would have through ag tourism, which SOAR promotes, it encourages, okay? SOAR doesn't do anything to the general plan except requires that voters get a chance and they get a say. When you're proposing general plan amendments to open space and agricultural areas, we know the difference between open space and agriculture. SOAR would apply to both. Okay. What was presented tonight, again, is a distortion of what SOAR is about. The wrong assumptions. Okay, SOAR has nothing to do with placing limits on agriculture that aren't already there under the existing general plan. Thank you.
Councilmember Sanchez.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Martinick, I agree. This presentation that we just got is seriously flawed. First of all, it has a very strong bias. It was put together, actually requested by the Chamber of Commerce. I am a member of the Chamber of Commerce, and I asked the executive director, and with all due respect, that we should have two sides of the issue on SOAR presented to the membership before making a decision. The executive director refused to allow SOAR to do a presentation. It was definitely on a one-sided track. So the membership of the Chamber of Commerce did not get to hear from the SOAR proponents, did not. And I feel that that was, as a member, I feel that that was a very serious flaw. And going forward, it is something that is really going to address the credibility of the Chamber of Commerce, and I feel very badly about that. But the bottom line is that is seriously flawed because of the premise that the city has included agricultural zones to satisfy state mandated housing goals. In fact, the city has never included our ag lands, which have no water hookups, no sewer hookups, no infrastructure improvements, no services. It would be extremely almost impossible to provide housing for workforce, especially for workforce housing there, because it would be a huge cost to Oceanside taxpayers and ratepayers. Either we're going to have to cut all other services and our levels are going to go down, or somehow the citizens of Oceanside are going to have to somehow subsidize that kind of development. We have never, ever encouraged residential housing. It has never, ever, ever been part of our plans to satisfy our housing goals. Our requirements have always been able to be met by our plans. Our plans submitted to the state have always been accepted by the state. We do not have to include, try to have police departments, fire departments, parks, all of that, build all those, and as you know, it's very, very expensive. We've had trouble just getting approval of a swimming pool. This report is seriously flawed. I fully support SOAR going forward. I am asking the citizens of Oceanside to, yes, please vote for SOAR. It will be on the November ballot. It will be something that'll be, in fact, support the economic viability of the city of Oceanside. Thank you.
Councilmember Kern.
Well, it's a little disingenuous for Mr. Martin to get up here. He has 2.5 acres and calls himself a farmer when the stuff he grows on his farm, on his lot, he just gives away. He's not a farmer. He's a wealthy landowner who wants to keep wealthy landowners in business in Oceanside. The idea that it does nothing for farming. So I have a couple questions. So Dr. Reaser, can you make your way back up to the podium? There's a couple of things I'd like to discuss, and then we can move on. So the city study took a look at the housing through the lens of Oceanside's job to housing ratio just within the confines of the city. And it comes to a much different conclusion than your study. How do you evaluate the city's housing supply, and how do you differ from the other study, and what conclusion do you come to?
Well, first of all, in terms of the housing numbers, we looked at we started out with the objective that the state target has set for the city. We looked at housing permits that are recorded as part of the stipulation that you actually show in terms of compliance with those goals. We also looked at the housing stock, which is not rising even as fast as permits, because not all those permits are actually completed, and also you have the demolition of some of the existing stock. And also in terms of the jobs housing ratio, we show many more jobs actually being created than housing units. So our analysis would indicate that in fact you would be creating twice as many jobs as housing units, so that would improve your jobs to housing unit. And also finally, in contrast to the city study, we include some of the jobs that are all the active duty jobs that are involved in the city of Oceanside and housed here, because we do count those active duty employees. As a footnote, if you include all those employees, the city of Oceanside has about 70,000 employees versus the some 46,000 that was quoted in the study that was presented 2 weeks ago.
So did your study and the city study include the employment of Oceanside residents at Camp Pendleton?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Can you walk us through how this measure will result in more high-dollar, large home lots at the expense of Oceanside farmland? Because that seems like where it's headed.
Under the current law, as you all know, the area is zoned for agricultural, which means that you can have homes in the area that are size 2.5 acres per dwelling unit. And so you do have already significant housing in that area. And the outcome, giving you the comments you've heard from the farmers here, if you look at the numbers, agriculture is generally not profitable. It is losing money, it is hemorrhaging, it is in its own crisis. And the way out will ultimately be, in some cases, you will actually see bankruptcies being filed or land letting go fallow, or the most likely exit path for many farmers will be just to sell their land to wealthy investors or wealthy owners, who then will be using that space to have large estates with those acreages, at least 2.5 acres per home. So that will actually add to the strains on the existing infrastructure with not the economies of scale that you would be seeing with significant infrastructure that would take place with the kinds of investments that you would have with a somewhat larger development.
Thank you.
And then that would, just to further answer your question, that would increase your income and wealth inequality, because what you would be seeing is basically the northeast part of the city of Oceanside populated primarily by wealthy homeowners, whereas much of the rest of the city would be middle income, lower income households.
Thank you. The bottom line is, no out of the real farmers came here to speak against it. Speak for it. All the real farmers spoke against this tonight. And the idea, if you want to save farming at Oceanside, you will vote no on this initiative. So that's all I have to say. I'll let Councilmember Feller close since he and I brought this forward.
Deputy Mayor Lowry.
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a couple questions also, but I'm based upon what we're learning about this, if the SOAR initiative passes, we'll be saving chunks of land for people who have the money, who can afford a house that's 15 or 20 miles away from the central part of the city. And they will be contributing to sprawl because they have houses that are far away that need roads that go to them. They're talking about, I've read the proposal, and it would stop infrastructure development, which would improve the roads and perhaps bring businesses in there so they don't have to drive all the way over to downtown Oceanside to buy a beer at a brew pub. So I think the idea of limiting what can happen there will definitely impact the agritourism that we spent a couple years working on, and I think that's a really great concept that we have. My intent is to make a decision based upon information rather than making a decision on, wow, we got to do this, or yeah, let's do that, or yahoo. So I think that what we're doing right now is exploring the information. I thought it was pretty interesting that people stated that the Chamber of Commerce was opposed to this when we've had the director of the chamber come here and say that they only said they would like us to take our time and evaluate what's going on. He didn't say yes or no about anything. Currently today he said he's opposing the SOAR initiative and that the chamber has to vote on that as a group. It's not just one person coming in and shooting from the hip. So I have a question about what would the likely outcome of the proposed measure be in terms of Oceanside farmland? We looked at the flyer that one of the farmers brought up that showed that anything on farming is a negative impact right now, that they're really challenged to just stay in business. But why would SOAR impact their businesses according to what you've researched?
As I said, basically there's these three channels for survival now, and one would be to invest in significant upgrades, as you heard from Mr. Nagata, for instance, to upgrade the recycled water systems. That would require significant infrastructure spending. That path would be foreclosed. Second would be to develop a truly vibrant agritourism business. SOAR would appear to, as we've heard last week, as the tier one type of activities, which would be very limited, essentially a farm stand. That is not really the kind of viable agritourism business that would make farming profitable. You would be wanting to look at more robust coffee operations, wineries, lodging, retailing, and that would entail infrastructure spending. That would not be accommodated by SOAR. And the third would be you could keep farming part of your territory, but part of your land, but you also would be looking at ways to perhaps develop part of it into some housing, some commercial activities, so are more other agribusiness areas. So all those channels for sustainability of agriculture seem to be blocked at every intersection by SOAR, which is, again, the irony of the SOAR initiative. And again, I came at it from, I think SOAR, the intent is so very laudable, But then you look at the actual consequences, and instead of helping agriculture survive, helping develop the agritourism cluster that you've envisioned, you essentially would be blocking all of those paths towards success.
So the city, currently we are spending money and a lot of time studying what recycling water does, and the agricultural areas need highly purified recycled water if they're going to use it on crops. So what you're saying is we can't get that water out there, even though we can produce it in an unlimited way, because we have more water than we need and we have to throw it out into the ocean.
Correct.
So if we want to move our recycled, purified water out to Morrow Hill so the farmers can use that, we won't be able to do that if SOAR passes because it blocks infrastructure improvements?
That would appear to be the case.
Okay.
And if you look at, in terms of, again, what Mr. Nagata said, in terms of getting, for instance, the private capital to finance such an infrastructure, you are looking for, and I worked most of my career in the banking sector, and essentially if you are making approval for a loan from the credit department, if there's a question about the legality of such investments or the appreciation of the collateral, the answer is going to be no, you're not going to be financing it.
So the report that we had, that the city staff reported to us a couple of weeks ago, the 9212 report, had a similar objective as yours to analyze what the impacts of this initiative would be if they were passed. But it appears that you used differing methodology and assumptions than what the city did. The city staff approaches it from very much what is it that we have to do, what will the impact be upon our fiscal budget, and they came up with a result that said that we would have less money in the city coffers. And I'm wondering how you came up with that negative number that you had on one of your graphs, and how SOAR will segregate our community by wealth, so only the wealthy people will be able to live in that area. Is that part of what you were explaining to us? And how did you get to that same conclusion the staff did? Well,
first of all, as you heard just at the last public speaker here, the study that the city had done was much more of a theoretical study. It did not actually look and ask what was feasible in this area. They did not interview landowners or developers. We did, and so we modeled what actually seemed to be practical and feasible. Second, we looked at a more comprehensive view of the multiplier ripple effects throughout the economy. We use much more complex econometric models to capture all of those different indirect and direct effects. And third, in terms of the fiscal impact, we modeled specifically the agricultural area to look at the net impact of it would be running a deficit or a surplus in the final year, and we model it actually in current dollars is to be in synchronization with the way you do your outlook in terms of forecasting. So that is how we came up with the results. But you also are correct that the study that the city had done and ours both showed that there would be a significant opportunity cost lost if SOAR were to be passed in terms of jobs and potential net revenue for the city's fiscal standing.
So that makes sense. So it seems apparent, or maybe even obvious, that we can either listen to the slogans of the promoters, as I started to say at the beginning, or we can listen to the facts, which you're presenting us and which we were presented with a couple of weeks ago, to make informed decisions when we go to vote on this item. And as an Oceanside resident, I'm going to do as much homework as I can. I'm not going to believe the save our open space slogan, which there is no open space to save, and save our parks, and the parks are already private property. No one's wanted to do anything with the parks.
Public,
So
yes.
I think that's what we have to deal with, and everyone has to make their decision with education, not slogans. So thank you for explaining that.
Thank you.
Councilmember Feller? No, I want to get to the public hearings.
So I thank you for your time. You can rest easy now. I'm just going to make a couple of statements because I read your report and I'm very impressed with it. The one that kind of stuck was the initiative would prevent the creation of a viable agritourism industry, because there will be significant infrastructure required. In reality, I think the people that would like to develop their farm if this were to somehow pass, would be faced with elections that are $45,000 to $750,000 to change the use on their land. And in here it says, in reality, given the historical failure of such ballot measures to be approved, no one's going to take the risk on any kind of new development. So the key, I think, is probably infrastructure. You have stated over and over that economically it's a big risk. I would say to the voters, the big question is who's going to pay for all this infrastructure if it was successful, based on 2.5 acre lots or more. Housing of that size is not going to be on septic, and the whole community can't go on septic in Morrow Hills. So if they're going to cut off what the farmers actually want to do, I think the thing that we're probably mostly concerned with is the farmers going out of business just because they can't, and you know, there's somebody's going to have to pay for that infrastructure, and it's probably not going to be the city in this case. My last statement in closing is that I think this is a taking of personal property rights with no negotiation. It was drawn up as saving parks, as we heard, and I mean, I know both the mayor and I heard it as they were gathering signatures. Don't you want to save our parks, and don't you want to save our open space and our farmland? But bottom line, this is a no-growth slam dunk. I mean, you can be promised this is no opportunity for farmers who are truly farmers going forward. So with that, I'll bring it to a close.